Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our 25th annual Kiplinger Lecture. Yay, yes. I am the Reverend Dana Edwards, and my pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the Minister of Faith Formation here at Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Congregation. And we gather here today, as we have for 75 years, on the ancestral lands of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway Conoy peoples, and on the land where enslaved African people and their descendants toiled without choice or recompense. We honor their enduring presence, wisdom, and stewardship, and their stewardship of this land throughout generations past, present, and future.
We gather together as one community, embracing a diversity of ages, beliefs, cultures, sexualities, genders, abilities, life circumstances, nationalities, and documentation status. We welcome everyone in the fullness of who you are, and we're glad you're here.
We are so glad you're here. If this is your first time at a Unitarian Universalist congregation, know that we are part of the congregational Protestant lineage of Christian congregations. However, more than a century ago, we decided to build our religious community on how we respect and treat each other, rather than uniformity of belief. And as a non-creedal community, we honor religious wisdom and truth wherever we find it. In the great religious traditions of the world, in nature, in our hearts, and specifically today in our democratic values.
Democracy is one of our 8 cardinal principles. Our 5th principle calls us to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregations and in the society at large. This principle represents our commitment to the one voice, one vote ideal central to any democratic institution. It also reflects a deeper belief that we're all created equal and possess unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our 5th principle is how we live out the first principle, which calls us to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
And while it may seem unusual for a religious body to include a commitment to a political method and its defining principles, democracy is more than a mechanism of governance. It is, as Reverend Bill Sinkford puts it, an act of faith, not faith that any one point of view will prevail, but faith that the will of this country and these people will point us towards the beloved community. Democracy demands more than simple majoritarianism. It requires voting, respect for election results, protection of liberties, and the guaranteeing of the right and conscience of free discussion. We must remain vigilant to prevent any usurpation of individual liberty by the majority.
In this context, we welcome Sylvia Mathews Burwell as our speaker for our 25th Kiplinger Lecture, titled The Values, Morals, and Ethics, the Need for All Three in Public Service.
The Kiplinger Lecture on Ethics in American Society is now in its 25th year. It aims to promote a deeper understanding of ethics and morality and to encourage individuals to apply that understanding in their lives. This lecture was made possible by the generous gift from the Kiplinger Foundation in memory of Mr. Willard M. Kiplinger. Willard Kiplinger was a journalist, an editor, and an author known for writing about the effects of the national government on the economy. He founded Kiplinger Publishing Company, which originated the Kiplinger Letter and magazine. Mr. Kiplinger was an active Unitarian throughout his life and a founding member and key supporter of this congregation. His philanthropic activities included supporting educational television and WETA in its early stages. His son, Austin, continues this culture of philanthropy and has honored his father by establishing the endowment grant for an annual program on ethics here at Cedar Lane.
We welcome Mr. Kiplinger's grandson, Knight, and his wife, Ann, who are with us in person tonight. On behalf of the Cedar Lane community, we are grateful for your generosity that makes this program possible. I want to recognize the members of the Kiplinger Lecture team who worked hard to organize this year's lecture. Judith Schaefer, Mimi Narayan, Peter Fenn, Barbara Dumont, and Amy Couch.
And now I'd like to invite up Peter Fenn, who will give a more complete introduction of Sylvia Mathews Burwell.
Thank you very much. As you can see, Sandy and I got the memo, and we dressed in exactly the same. That's individualism, right? I'll tell you, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Sylvia Mathews Burwell. It's an easy job for me. I don't have to read a standard bio here, but you'll get a little of it. For over a dozen years, Sylvia has been a neighbor and a friend. She is a kind and generous person who embodies the values and ethics that the Kiplinger Lecture and the Kiplinger family honors and celebrates. I have a lot of stories about Sylvia, but I'll only tell one today. And it's a recent one, and Sylvia may know what's coming. When the big snow and ice storm hit last month, I looked outside our window, and who did I spot? With shovels. Sylvia, her wonderful husband, Stephen, and their two teenage kids, Helene and Matthew. And I had a little surgery, and, but I mean, look, I'm tough, right? But I'll tell you, for you all must wonder how it is that I have the former president of American University, the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Director of Management and Budget shoveling my walk. I will tell you, if you lived across the street from Sylvia Mathews Burwell and you needed her help, she'd be shoveling your walk too. Now, we're ready to sell our house, so no, we're not. I'm kidding. I'll get a good price for it, though. When people say the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, they're talking about Sylvia, who had wonderful involved parents and grandparents in Hinton, West Virginia, and supported by a tight-knit, caring community. She excelled there, went to Harvard, where she is now the president of the Board of Overseers. Following college, she was a Rhodes Scholar and got involved in politics. I don't know why. I mean, somebody like me, I don't get that one. She served in the Clinton Treasury Department, the National Economic Council, OMB, as I said, and the White House as Deputy Chief of Staff. After the election of 2000, and there may be a few people in this room who remember 2000, hanging chads, Florida, well, we were all out of a job. But Sylvia became a real leader in the nonprofit world. She headed up the Global Development Program for the Gates Foundation, and she was president of the Walmart Foundation. For many of you, that means you can give away some money to good causes. President Obama brought her back to Washington, and one thing I can tell you about Sylvia is she's worked across the aisle when it's needed, but she's not afraid to stand up for the principles she believes in when necessary. And as Secretary of HHS, she led the way to get funding and congressional support to combat both the Ebola and Zika viruses. As OMB director, she battled to save the funding for the Affordable Care Act, and the government was shut down, major cuts were averted, and Sylvia negotiated a 2-year budget deal from there. Most recently, as many of you know, from 2017 to 2024, Sylvia served as the 15th president of American University. She led a $500 million capital campaign, grew the endowment by 50%, and doubled the university's research funding. Wherever she's been, she's delivered results, and results that are a testament to her ethics and values, her treatment and management of people, and her vision. So it's an honor for me to introduce a wonderful neighbor and a wonderful friend, Sylvia Mathews Burwell.
Yeah. I was just about to invite Secretary Mathews and Reverend IB up for begin our dialogue, but here they are.
Thank you, Peter. That was an amazing introduction. I mean, really. You just captured the whole essence of what we're going to be talking about. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome, Secretary Burwell.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Sylvia. Welcome. We're delighted that you accepted our invitation and are joining us here at Cedar Lane. And I'm so looking forward, or as they say in Oxford, so chuffed.
Thank you for the invitation, and Peter, thank you for the kind introduction.
So we connected last week and just had a wonderful conversation that I continue to just savor. Was particularly, I was just taken by how quickly the conversation shifted away from the stated topic, which I particularly loved. Not necessarily to shift away from the theme of ethics in government and what it means to live into that, but more how you went deeper into aspects that to me really unfolded something that was, I felt, very important for us to be able to reflect on and discuss today. You talked about the moral and civic ground that ethical leadership rests, which to me felt especially fitting here in this setting. I shared a little bit about who we are as a progressive religious faith, Unitarian Universalism, and as a congregation. And in our tradition, we sometimes say that we are not a belief-centered religion, but a value-centered religion, and that people come here with many different beliefs and spiritual paths, and we don't tell people what to believe. Much more, we emphasize in how are we living into those beliefs and those values as a covenanted religious community of people. And we even have a slightly ridiculous but a memorable acronym that helps us remember our values. We call it JET-PIG, which is justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. JET-PIG. with love at the center. So these are our values that have undergirded us and continue to guide our religious living. Just pardon me, I'm rambling a bit here trying to set it up so we can go into it. So just bear with me just for a few minutes. So you shared with me that you hoped that this conversation wouldn't be about policy or political strategy or partisanship, so much as the moral imagination that holds a democratic society together, and the values that shape us, shape leaders, and the values that shape the citizens who choose them. And then you shared something that really stayed with me. You said the rule of law is necessary, but it is not sufficient. That really stuck. Because law matters, institutions matter, but underneath them we have a shared set of commitments, ethical commitments to community, humility, respect, and a sense that we belong to one another, serving a life much larger than our own. So I'd like to begin where you encouraged me to begin, which is formation. Peter mentioned you're growing up in Hinton, West Virginia, and then you're spending time in Japan through the Youth for Understanding program. Just curious how those early formative experiences, your family, your community, your faith, your time abroad, shape your sense of community and responsibility and your path toward public service. So a long-winded introduction with a question, which is a typical you thing to do, by the way.
Well, again, thank you all for having me. And I do think that what you see and what you do as a child and as you grow and learn actually is important to creating the schema, the approaches to how you approach both living and problem solving and work as you do it. So I think it is an important part of that. And some things developed, and I'll talk about what developed and then how it developed. The idea, so I'm a second-generation immigrant. All four, I'm not what is in the news looking like what immigrants are, but I'm only second generation. So all four of my grandparents came to this country. And that, why? They came because they were looking for a better life. So all four of my grandparents come from Greece. But they came for the same reasons that many immigrants come today, is because they wanted a better life for their children and grandchildren. So this concept of this nation is giving us a lot, so we must give back, was a constant theme as a child. Another constant theme was of those who a lot is given, much is expected. And so those are a schema, and they developed because of how my parents were living their lives. So my father was a member of every funny hat organization that you can imagine. My father was an elk. My father was a moose. My father was a Shriner. My father was a 33-degree Mason. Was in the DeMolay. Was my father, our town of 3,000 people had an annual citizenship pageant. And my father, there was liberty and democracy and my dad was democracy every year. And so my father was the lay reader in the church. My mother was president of the church women for 26 years. My mother was part of the business and professional women. My mother was part of the service club. My mother started in her teaching, she taught classes, and she would do professional development for her students that included teaching them about the holidays of other faiths. We're in West Virginia, the buckle on the Bible Belt, so understanding what Passover was a big deal. You know, any of those things. She considered that professional development in terms of her students. So what I grow up seeing is a deeply engaged group. And my family was deeply engaged. We were engaged in our church. We were engaged in our community. My mother, to this day, is still selling. She is 90 years old, and she is currently the senior warden at our church, which isn't even a church, it's a parish because it's so small, about 10 people a service on Sundays. And that's the life I grew up with. And so at my house, you didn't trick or treat until you trick or treated for UNICEF. So from 4 to 6, you would go all around, my sister and I with the little things, going around house to house to house to house. You'd come back, get a quick bite, and then from 6 to 8, you do regular trick-or-treating. And so when someone passed in the community, you know, my sister or I would go, and you'd go to all the neighbors and collect money for flowers because your neighbors, your community would be honoring that family who had suffered a loss. And so my life was just, that's the way it was. That's the way that's the way I was raised. That's what I saw. Those were my experiences. And I think they deeply, deeply shaped me, including my experiences engaging in public service and that sort of thing. So when I was in the 3rd grade, my best friend Christy's father ran for county commissioner. And so there are 8-year-old kids in the back of a truck yelling Bill Gore for county commissioner, riding through town, working on that campaign. When I was, my father goes on to become a member of the Board of Education. My mother is an appointed head of the State Board of Education, but even our own engagement. When we were in the 6th grade, we started a newspaper. Kiplinger family, I hope, would be proud. It was called the Central News and World Report. It was, we started this newspaper. Our elementary school was Central Elementary School. And we landed a huge interview. A man named Jay Rockefeller was running for governor. And he was coming to Summers County, my county. And we scored the first interview on the steps of the memorial building. Myself, my best friends, Terry Giles and Christy Gore, we went with for most in this crowd, I think, understand what a cassette recorder is. Okay. So we had our cassette recorder, we had our long notepads, you know, the reporter pads, and we went and interviewed Jay Rockefeller on the courthouse steps as part of our reporting for the Central News. It was the biggest piece, I think, that we ever reported. But all of these experiences, you know, add up over time. They are what you grow up with. They are what you see. They are what you learn. And I think it makes a huge difference to both what you do and how you do it.
Wow. We were checking in about the whole culture of volunteerism and voluntary associations, which you just shared, how deeply engaged your parents were, and which in turn inculcated in you that sense of service. And you talked about how, you know, de Tocqueville lifts that up about what impressed him the most when he visited this country. And I'm just wondering how that shift has happened now from where it was to where we are now when, you know, Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, which came out in the 90s, really talked about how society here now has, just gone from even being nuclear to being isolated, which has only deepened in the past few decades. How do you see that impacting some of our own sense of the moral conscience and the imagination that calls us to be of service?
So this decline of a sense of community and acting together, I think, is at the root of some of our current challenges that we as a nation face. And I had referenced in Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, and how de Tocqueville writes and talks about the importance of organizations, of community, as a very important structure that he saw in the United States that was so important, that he felt was a very important and distinguishing factor. And I find that to be true, and I believe it's actually related. As one thinks about your values, which are, your basic beliefs, and then your morals about how you translate those, and then your ethics / rule of law, how the governance structure that you're a part of, whether it's a religious community or a nation, takes those values, morals, and translates them into rules or guidelines or that sort of thing. And so I think this concept of the importance of community, which I believe is related to the fundamental concept of love and a fundamental need of humanity and a basis of human living, it flows through. And what I think, we've seen in various forms and ways, and our system was set up with an inherent tension between the concept of the individual, liberty, and the concept of the democracy, community. And so this idea of individual versus community is an inherent tension. And the question is one prime over the other? Should you have one prime over the other? And I thought about that. We talked about it. And as I reflected on it more, when Reverend Abi and I were discussing it, I said community needs to be prime. Individual needs to be present, respected, but subprime. And I would actually answer the question slightly differently as I reflected on it further. And what I would say is, it depends on the moment which concept needs to be prime. And it also depends on the particular issue. But what I do believe is that in this moment, that we have erred, perhaps, or the pendulum has swung too far away from the concept of community, the concept of we, versus the concept of I. And that what Robert Putnam writes about in Bowling Alone, for those of you who have not had the opportunity to read it, the book is basically about, and he writes this back late 70s, early 80s. Early 90s. He writes about the decline of bowling leagues. And that is just one of many, many examples of the things that bring us as a community. The fact that we live in suburbs and we commute in, so we're not part of the JCs, the Lions Club, the Elks, the Moose, the decline in all of those entities that bring us together. And the Bowling Alone was about, that's how we bowl now. We don't bowl in leagues as a team. And so that idea of that decline, and as a matter of fact, when I was finishing up at Oxford, I was either going to go and work for a couple of years and go to law school or get my PhD. And if I was going to get my PhD, I wanted to do it in government. And there were two topics you will find I'm highly intellectually curious and getting myself to focus, but I had two. I had narrowed it to two. One of the topics was the decline of the individual and what that meant for democracy. Because it wasn't just about bowling alone, it was also the rise of individualized interests. So at that time, whether it was the NRA or Planned Parenthood, you were getting letters to make you a single issue voter. And so that was about your individual issue. We saw the decline of committee structures in the Congress, the power of the committee. And we saw the decline of the party.
Yes.
And whether we have the right party structures or whether this is right, the party is a gathering where I have to give up some of my individualism to be a part of the team. So I believe that this idea and this concept right now is how we think about a greater return to the valuing of community in different ways, because community has both its rewards. As I said, it is related to our fundamental needs, I think, as humans, and love and being together. But it also helps with the structures by which we can both govern and live in a world of differing things.
That's so fascinating. This morning we had a powerful service led by my colleague, the Reverend Fred Muir, who actually coined a phrase, "I culture," a few years ago when he...
I was not at that service. I was at a different service. But
the I culture, which he was reflecting on that very same idea of how individualism is so seeped into our consciousness, especially Unitarian Universalists. We love, and as Emerson said, a person will worship something, and sometimes we've been accused of worshiping individualism. Totally misunderstanding what people like Emerson were talking about, which was about individuality, which is different from individualism. And so Fred was unpacking that a bit and really talking about how individuality pointed to the commitment to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So that's what individuality is, the uniqueness of being. And how that is in community. You know, we are human through our relationships. And how is that fostered and built and strengthened? By being in community together. And in that sense, you know, community being both the setting and the container that holds the individuality of each of us as unique beings. And so he was kind of calling us UUs into, you know, lovingly into it, just pointing out that we need to step away from our liberal religious tendencies sometimes to situate ourselves more about individualism, about my inherent worth and dignity, as opposed to the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
did he mention Ubuntu?
Well, he didn't, but yes, that is very much grounded in Ubuntu,
Right.
which is also, you know, what Dr. King was referencing when he talked about the beloved community, which is also, again, something that is found in other ancient traditions, including in the Hindu tradition. We have a concept called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the world is one family, and that the blessing and the calling is how we live into the world as one family, not as the individual. So there is all this interplay and the tension, which I love your holding and lifting it up. But how do we ground ourselves and move with some humility from that place which sometimes celebrates our ego to a deeper consciousness of being?
I think, you know, it is through discernment that one does that. And I think we're in a particular time and season of that, whether it's Ramadan, Passover's upon us, Lent. You know, these are often periods of discernment. And it's interesting, Our sermon was not on that topic today, but was about lessons and the lessons of water and the Samaritan woman at the well and the drink. Which water keeps you thirsty, and which water, for which you'll never ever need to drink. And this ego concept is the water that keeps you thirsty. Drink of that water, and you'll always be thirsty.
Wow.
Drink of the other, and you won't. And I think the connection to that, to discernment, is that pausing and reflecting on your motivation, reflecting on what outcome you are seeking, and why. And I think whether that's in what you're doing as an individual, in community, or how you're thinking about participating in the broader concerns, which are very real, that many of us have right now. But thinking about those things together, I think, is one way that we try and move forward. That aim for the water that will keep you from being thirsty, and understand what types of water just continue the thirst.
Wow.
And I think that's particularly relevant as one thinks about how and why people act. Which water are they drinking, and why?
Wow. That's a sermon.
Did some liberty with.
That'll preach. So, how do we hold liberty and shared responsibility together without letting one erode the other? How do we live in that tension?
I think it is about, I think the way that one does it is by figuring out your jet pig. So if your jet pig is jet pig, okay. But, you might have a different jet pig. Starting with your values. Like, what are the three, I like threes. I was a McKinsey consultant, and 3 is really what the mind can hold. And maybe that's why we got a Trinity. I don't know.
Well,
but
we may be Unitarian, but we love threes too.
But the concept, what are the 3 most important values to you? Starting there. And I do think it's also getting over that my individuality adds value to the community. And I want to be a part of communities that recognize that. And that's the community. I help make the community because of my individuality versus my individuality or individualism first, and then I subsume to the community. It's like, no, I bring this to the community. So that connection, and that's where, the maintenance of liberty. And that's liberty for yourself. And then as you kind of go to the next circle, the liberty of others. And this is where, I think, and this gets to the governing and when one is in government and how you think about these things, is focusing on where does one thing stop and another begin? And those are hard questions. Like recognizing that they're hard questions and people can have differing opinions. But understanding that there are those spaces, and it takes thinking and hard thinking. I like thinking about like Winnie the Pooh struggling to think at times. It's just that it actually, when I think of Pooh, I think about, it's hard thinking. And it is hard, but I think you got to put the time and energy in. to thinking through, and especially if you're in a governing position, that's what your job is to think through where these things meet. So as an individual, get your jet pig, think about how your jet pig, your values, translates to your morals. So I say I believe in honesty. Well then, how does that translate to my morals? The moral is I don't tell lies. But whatever it is, you know, that translation, and then how do you live it in action?
Right. So I mentioned earlier about how struck I was when you said that the rule of law is necessary but not sufficient. What has to live underneath law for democracy to actually work? And what kind of a moral culture, you know, civic habits or shared commitments that we need to be cultivating to make the rule of law meaningful?
So, you know, I believe that the rule of law, as I said, necessary but not sufficient, you know, and we'll move from de Tocqueville and go to Hobbes and the Leviathan and the Hobbesian state, the state of nature, which is without those structures, the structures of law and the structures, you know, actual governing structures that, you know, as Hobbes said, nasty, brutish, and short. And, you know, I think the rule of law is extremely important. But as I said, it is necessary but not sufficient. Because the rule of law, those laws have to be built on shared values and shared morals. And that's where we may, at this moment in time, some days I feel like we may not be all in the same place. And that's why I say that the rule of law, many of the things that I see happening and I'm like, well, that's got to be against the law. And it's not. And then if you study other things historically, there were many actions of people that led to highly destructive times and periods in our world. They were acting within the frame of law.
That's right.
So the effectiveness of those laws, they are necessary, but without an agreed upon system of values and morals that are similar and similarly interpreted, you're not going to get the outcomes that you seek. And that's what I meant when I said it is necessary but not sufficient.
Thank you. So you spent many years making decisions where some of those values were anything but abstract, and really you had to sit with them, wrestle with them, and make decisions from that place of discernment. Especially when you were director of Office of Management and Budget, you were making choices, daily choices that affected real lives, as Peter shared about national security priorities versus early childhood programs, responses to public health crises. And you know, budgets are often described as moral documents because they reveal what a society truly values and is committed to. So when everything feels urgent and worthy, how do you decide what takes priority?
It's hard, is what I would say. And I would start with, you know, I've been fortunate to work in the private sector, work universities, NGOs, and government. And government is really one of the hardest. And it is because the core things that you're measuring against, it's not the simplicity, you know, the 1, 2, 3 of, you know, profitability, customer engagement, you know, getting to those things, it's very, very hard in government. And that's because when you're the director of OMB, what you are focusing on is, should we put these dollars towards early Head Start or night vision goggles that will protect our troops who are fighting in Kosovo or Bosnia? And those are very real choices. And it is a combination of what I would say, how do you make those decisions? You got to do the really hard analytics. You got to really understand what is the dollar getting and what are the real outcomes? What are the measured outcomes? What do you know? You got to like take emotion out, but do the hard analytics and then really get to the question of what are you making this decision on? What do I have to believe in order to make the decision one way or another? And test that premise. You know, do I need to believe? I mean, I still remember I opened a munitions line of something called Joint Defense Air Missiles, JDAMs. And we put the money towards that. And you know that like that meant other money wouldn't go towards other things. And obviously it's also a tool of war. But in the end, those munitions helped bring peace. Those munitions. And so, but you do have to like test your logic. And I think people, that is a discipline that is in your logic will be informed by intuition and values. And there's no separating that. And so even, you know, I took formal logic, highly analytical, but just knowing that in the end, those analytics get informed and how you make the choice that you're making and what you believe will be highly informed by your values and even your intuition.
So how does one, especially a leader, cultivate that kind of moral discipline? You know, the ability to pause and interrogate one's own motives or reasons. Because we're living in a somewhat, what you're saying sounds not just countercultural, but even heretic in our time now. So I'm just interested to hear more about how does one go about that?
It is very difficult, and you can't always do it. You know, when I always used to say, like when I was in the White House, it's like if the problem gets here, if you're making a decision in that world, it's for one of two reasons. Its complexity is such that it's risen to this level because it couldn't get done, or its impact is so great that you got to like check, double check, make sure, that sort of thing. And there are so many things like that time is the constraint. Time is the constraint that I think most interferes. Although I'm not sure I can speak for how some decisions are getting made now in terms of that being the constraint. Time is what is hard, but it is about discipline. It is an incredible discipline. And it is both, in one sense, it's an intellectual rigor that's required, but the other is, it is in a sense, a spiritual, a values-based rigor that you have to keep coming back to. And the other part that I think is hard, you're asking, you know, I'm not exactly, the hard part's making sure you're connecting with the community, the nation that you're making these decisions about. You know, you always hear about how leaders get in the bubble. And they like just get in this bubble of hearing, like convincing themselves that, you know, this is the right thing. I mean, and you see it on any groups of leaders. And so how you make sure you continue to hear from the outside, that's extremely important. How you stay connected to your values. And so whether, you know, you're a person of faith, you meditate, however, like stay connected to your values. And then that intellectual rigor has to apply. And so creating practices and places and ways that you can and should do that. I will say, becoming a mother, you know, the first time I served in government, I was not a mother. The second time I served in government, I was a mother. And it's like an easy way to stay connected. A very very easy. It's like a simple way to stay connected.
Wow. Another part of leadership we touched on was discernment and proportionality. And you mentioned in public life, today we often see people kind of swing between the two extremes, either nothing matters or everything is treated as equally outrageous, and that leadership requires deeper moral clarity than that. So when leaders fail morally, how do we think clearly about accountability and impact without collapsing into cynicism on one side or flattening everything on the other?
I think part of the way that you don't get there is you pause on, what are the outcomes I'm seeking? What do I actually want? And, we all do it. It's, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, It's, that emotional response, that emotive response that you immediately have when you see something that is not just, is inequitable, is all of those things. And I think, we have this children's book called Rosie's Brain, and it's about teaching children about how to engage the prefrontal cortex so that you get decision making through thinking versus emotion. Doesn't mean the emotion's not important, the amygdala is not important, but like this idea of that connection and how you get that connection. And I guess the biggest thing when you ask, like, how do you not slip into either one, I would just say pause. For those of you who have spent any time on DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, not cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a tool, and it's called, that they teach children, and they teach all kinds of people. This was originally started, I think, as treatment for people with post-traumatic stress from military engagement, but has eventually evolved to be something that's used a lot with children. And but one of the tools that they teach kids in DBT is stop. Stop, and stop stands for stop. Take a step back, T. Observe, in other words, listen. And then P, proceed carefully. And I think that's how you try to not end up on either end of the throw your hands up or either of the two options that you provided.
I wish some people were taught that in kindergarten.
Yeah.
So you also said that ethics in government cannot hold if ethics in a nation are eroding, that leaders do not emerge in a vacuum, or they don't just manifest. They grow out of a culture. So how do we begin to rebuild a moral culture that supports ethical leadership and mend that fabric that feels frayed at this time? And where does that work begin?
Well, I want to thank the Kiplinger family because gatherings like this, focus like this, I think is an important part of the beginning of doing this work. I think we all have to kind of realize that, like, this work, this is hard work. It's very hard work. It's hard for all of us. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes putting our desire for action and change immediately, and our handling the injustices and other things that we see, but really kind of getting to how do we do that? How do we get to that? And I think we all have to own it, and that's why I raised it in the conversation. Because people straying from that we describe that we need a shared vision, a shared culture of values, of morality. And we seem to have strayed from that in ways. And it's not just the leaders. It's, this doesn't, we are a democracy, and even if it's not functioning perfectly well, things are being, the idea that why do leaders do these things? Especially elected officials. Like, why is it okay? Why? And it is accepted. And so the question of how and what we do, and, you know, it's like a movement. You know, there are the people, like the people that are here today that are like the point of the arrow. But then you have to have everything kind of coming behind. And how do you think strategically about the people that are the point of the arrow, being the point of the arrow in the most effective ways? And by that I mean assessing, how did we get here? Why do we think that some people, is it that they don't share our values, or do they not share the next step, the moral? And that's because they see the world differently. It really is getting to that level, and getting to that level with our neighbors, our friends, you know, there's the point of the arrow, and then there's those that are coming behind. I mean, I believe in these, you know, the movement for more civic education. I have always been a huge proponent of national service. Because national service gets to community. National service, you know, when I think about love, respect, and community, if I listed those as my three, national service hits all three in terms of what it does to help people get there. And so what are our tools, our ways? There are the believers, the people that are going to lead. There are the next group. And then there are a group that are the hardest to reach, and kind of got to work with 1 and 2, eventually hopefully get to 3. But how do we think about doing that as a nation? And what role do we as individuals play in that?
Towards the end of our conversation, you said something that is easy to forget in moments like this. That you indicated that the most important job is that of citizen. And for people who feel overwhelmed by all the noise, discouraged by what we are seeing, and unsure about what difference we can make, you wanted to ask some hard questions of us. What do we own? What question should each of us be asking ourselves right now? And what ordinary citizens can begin to live differently in ways that strengthen the moral community and the democracy that it depends on. What would you offer to us in response to those questions? You were asking us to ponder those questions, but I'm turning it around and asking you for some insights about what might we be considering?
Well, I do think that answering the questions does have to do with individuality in terms of how you think about the questions. And one of the things, you know, some ways, I'll give you some examples of how I've approached some of these questions myself. So last year, I taught a seminar at American. When I stepped down as president, I taught a seminar. And the seminar was called From Dolly Parton to Shabuzi, Is the 9 to 5 Over? Are we in a political realignment? And the reason that I wanted to teach that seminar is because I actually wanted to spend time on the question of how did we get here? Like, I don't believe, I mean, I know people in my own family who have a very different approaches. People in my hometown. I know good people, people who are people of faith. And so starting with the hard questions, I think is one of the things. And what have I done to contribute? Why had people given up and decided that the potential for destruction or the potential for leadership that they didn't really necessarily like, why was that a better option? Why had it gotten that way? And what have I done to contribute to that? And then the second thing in terms of, answering the question myself, I still really believe you have to answer it for yourself. I can tell you how have gone about answering parts of this, but I think everyone that's the hard part. My kids want a rubric to write their essays. Like, when I grew up, you didn't get a rubric to write an essay. Like, they just tell you, analyze the book. That's it. And we all want a rubric. We want the, okay, part A, we want the formula. We want the pill for weight loss. That is, and this is one where I am sorry, got the bad news here. Gonna be honest, this isn't easy. The second part is I worked on another effort. So the analyzing, how did we get here and what do I own? What do I own? How was I part of making people feel not solving their problems when I was in government, whatever it is? And then the second part is this concept of meeting the moment. And meeting the moment in the broadest concept. I think some days some people get up and feel meeting the moment is about, that's why I don't like necessarily the phrases that imply fighting with the administration, to be honest, because the moment we got here, there's a history to how we got here. And then when one thinks about the future, I just think we have to envision something different. Whether it's in specific terms so USAID is not coming back. That's a specific example. Or the broader sense of something. How research is funded at research universities, we're not going back to the way it was. There are going to be changes. This is not a reversion. And so spending time thinking about, knowing what you know about how the problem kind of came about to what the new looks like. So those are some of the ways that I personally work on answering those questions. But as I said, I really do think you have to ask them yourselves.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I don't have your answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was such an enriching opportunity to go a little deeper, and I really appreciate the thought, the intention, and the discernment that you brought. So grateful for.
Well, I have to thank you all because doing it made me. It was a disciplining mechanism. It really was. It was a forcing and disciplining mechanism. If you're going to, spend the time, I had to really, and you could see when we sat down to talk and thinking about the importance of what doing this on an annual basis and the 25th of these and this moment and what I hope would be a beneficial dialogue and conversation for each of you at a time when it's hard. It's hard, and especially a community like this, who is the point of the arrow? And is the point of the arrow in the sense that because you are values-based versus belief-based, and that's at the root of where we got some problems, you all are some of the people best tooled to think about how to move forward. You already kind of got to the importance of values, your community. And so you're at least steps ahead of many others. So thank you, because it did force me to have to really sit down and think, as Pooh would say.
Thank you. And so folks have some questions that I think are being gathered as we speak. And we'll spend some time, so which, of course, I don't know what they say.
Yes. I'll quickly explain Shabuzi while we're doing this. So I think everyone knows Dolly Parton in the movie 9 to 5. So Shabuzi is a country music artist of African descent, but here in the U.S. is actually from the DMV region, and had a very famous song that came out, I guess, maybe 2-3 years ago now. And the name of it's called The Bar Song, or Tipsy is the name of the song. But the seminal line, and you're like, great, this is why. The reason that I included it is because in the song, one of the lines that everybody knows is, my baby wants a Birkin, this type of bag that costs a lot of money. And then the next line is the line that why I put from Dolly Parton to Shabuzi. This 9 to 5 ain't working. And so the idea that I went into the seminar with was that, you know, there are really 3 fundamental things that people care most about. And it's related to your family and your community. It's your basic economics. Can I live my life and like feed my family? Can we go on maybe a vacation? It's the economics, which is the 9 to 5, and that was the reference. The second, there are 2 other things that I may as well. The second thing is health. Health. And access to affordable quality health care is an important thing. And the third bucket and so I had this hypothesis going into the seminar, and I examined that hypothesis throughout the seminar. The third bucket was a bucket that I call safety. And I'm not sure safety is the right word, but there is this idea that you believe that the meat you eat is okay. That if you have a hurricane, somebody's going to help a little bit. That your child is not, my 16-year-old is not going to have to go fight a war. And so there are a number of things that kind of fall into that safety bucket that you don't really want to think about on a day-to-day basis, that you just assume and accept that your government, that the non-Hobbesian state will take care of for you. So that's why the Shabuzi was a reference to the 9 to 5 ain't working. That's what he said. This 9 to 5 ain't working. They did not know who Dolly Parton was. And that is one. Oh, yes. His song was pop. It crossed over. Yes, his song, that song. He has other songs. That particular one crossed over into pop as well. Yes, yeah.
So the core of IGs in our government were previously guarantors of successful scrutiny of public officials and protectors of whistleblowers. What happened?
You know, this is one where, you know, this question of the law being necessary but not sufficient seems to be quite present. Actually, I guess I was at AU, so it's since 2017. It is after I left government. I mean, I was asked to speak at the whateverth anniversary of the piece of legislation that created the IGs. Because I had worked so closely with them. At OMB, you manage that's a part of it. And even though I was the B side, at one point we didn't have an M management side, so I helped manage the IGs, and that was a part of it. And so I spent lots of time. I knew the IGs from all over the federal government. And I don't understand. And this is one where there were where norms, and again, norms come from the culture of the values. The norms that like you would ever touch or do anything with the IGs was just like unheard of, unfounded, undone. And so I think one of the other problems in terms of, is what has happened to the IGs legal? I don't know the answer to the question. But we're in a place where the IGs no longer have the role, I think, and power that they once had as a place and a voice to help with any number of these issues. You would like never, you know, the IGs, congressional hearings. You know, when I moved, so I moved from OMB to HHS, and I moved after the challenges with the marketplace in terms of the website stuff. So I move over. When I move, and by the time I was done at HHS, there had been 117 investigations of the Affordable Care Act.
Wow.
I can't even tell you how many times I testified. And so that's just to create the contrast of the situation that where we are.
How can we fix a largely unfettered capitalist economy when there's clearly no interest in externalities? Example, critical $25 per gallon of gasoline, health costs? That's the question. I'm not sure what.
So gas right now was at a low point until the Iranian issue. But let me just talk about you know, what is the objective? Like, this is where, like, can we pause and kind of back up a little bit, and what's the objective? And I think the objective, I'm not sure, but I think the objective is like, I want to be able to feed my family, want to be able to have basic health and basic safety. I mean, getting to like, what's the objective and then what's the path there? So let's just take healthcare. You know, when you look at healthcare, you know, everybody starts the question with who pays. But like, that's not the issue. Mm-hmm. The issue is how much it costs. Like, we can get to who pays. And in the US right now, like, between the Affordable Care Act subsidies, Medicaid and Medicare, the vast majority of the payer, you know, we have employer-based care, but employer-based care is now in aggregate the minority in our system. So I just think as we think about these things, this is where kind of like, can we back up and think about what we want? So in our current system, I mean, and taking away the subsidies is a problem for affordability. If you wanted to get rid of the issues of fraud in the system, let's target that, work through that, and work on that. And there are ways to do that. And so in anything like this, it's just, I think, backing up and like, what is my objective? What's the outcome I seek? And then thinking through the steps to get there.
Thank you. You talked about the Good Samaritan and the well. How do we balance between helping others and always wanting to help other people and drinking the water that will forever quench our thirst?
Not quite sure I fully understand the question, but the tension between the helping and ensuring that you can kind of function and go forward, I think, may be at the root of that question. And again, I think these are questions that each and all of us face. And I think it is about getting that balance which is right for you as you connect to your values. But taking the time to try and seek that answer and, deciding what to do and how to do it in terms of making your choices. And I think when you face the choices, you spending the time and taking the step back and making the choice that's right for you in terms of that balance of the values. And I think one of the things that, whether it's scripture or even in deciding, is understanding that life is not just an on or an off switch. There's a dimmer. And how you think about the use of that dimmer for you is important. And that doesn't mean that you're not holding true to your values as you think through those things. Sorry if I'm not answering the question as you were put it forward.
You've been successful with colleagues and others who do not share your politics or your values. When you need to accomplish the big objectives with these folks, what's the first thing you think about to get the job done?
It's what you think about before you got the job to get done. So before you have the problem that you need to solve, in terms of like 96 to 0, I was approved by the United States Senate not that many years ago. It is about relationships. Start, I can still remember Leader McConnell at one point saying, Sylvia, and sometimes like he wouldn't even end a conversation, he would just hang up. And that's just his personality. Or actually, and that was on the other side. Harry Reid was notorious for that. Just no bye, no nothing. Just, are we done? I guess so. But this idea, he said, you tell me good, you tell me bad. It's about relationship. It's not, don't wait until you have a problem. Build the relationship before. Birthdays. How many? Call them all. I wrote handwritten notes to every senator that met with me before my confirmation hearings. Handwritten notes. I called every member before every hearing. House Ways and Means, that's 40-some people. And I see you, I respect you. The idea of respect and decency, even in disagreement. At one of my hearings, Dr. Tom Coburn was one of my introducers. For those of you who may not remember, God rest his soul, Dr. Coburn was an extremely conservative senator from the state of Oklahoma. But he was one of my introducers. Your introducers are supposed to be these people who are telling glowing things to the other senators so they'll vote for you. And what Tom Coburn said was, Sylvia and I agree on almost nothing on an issues basis. But what we do agree on is our fundamental values. And that's why I'm here to tell you to support her. And so it is about relationship and respect, even with those that you vehemently can disagree. But it's not at the moment of the problem. You know, that's performative, and what we accuse all these young people of doing all the time. You can't be performative.
What values and morals do you think our country can agree on?
Family. I think the vast majority would agree on community. Think about it. Think about how, you know, the MAGA folks are a community, right? A number of them are. I think we could agree on those. I think at their core, you know, agree is a funny word. What I actually am not sure it's at the value stage that there's the disagreement. I think it's at the next stage, the moral stage, the how you take those values into life in terms of how what people see as right or wrong or what they support. And it's that next step that I think is the place where we get more tangled up.
What advice would you give to fundraisers in these uncertain times? How do we help people maintain generosity?
The hearing them. And whether you're trying to get something passed in the United States Congress or you're trying to raise money for a scholarship at American University, the most fundamental thing is hearing people. And I know, and having been on the flip side of this, you know, at the Gates Foundation at Walmart, how many times somebody comes in and tells you why what they've got is what you want, versus starting with, can I understand what you want? Can I hear what you're thinking, what's on your mind, how you're thinking about it? And that's, you know, whether it's during challenging times or not challenging times, the clarity with which you both listen and connect is a key part of the fundraising issue, I think, whatever kind you're doing.
Just a few more. What does it say about the morality of a nation that elected a man of very low character to be its president? What does such choice teach our children?
You know, I think what I find the hardest, you know, we have two children, an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old. Our son is younger. And it's just so hard for me to help him understand might does not make right. Like, you know, I could have him sit down and read the Peloponnesian Wars. Okay, the Melian dialogue, the Mytilean debate. Let's go through those. Not so much. You're thinking, this poor child. I know you are. Peter can tell you he's okay. You know, that's the part that I find like one of the hardest things. The might makes right. That the question of power versus authority, trying to help him, and our daughter too, you know, she's a little more like, we're at the launch stage. She's 18, and like, hopefully, he's got a little more. And that's the thing. I mean, I hear you. As a parent, I hear your question because, like, I live it every day. And between that and the technology creating an inability to stop, to do stop, S-T-O-P, it is, my mother, like, always says, she just says, it's just so much harder to raise a kid now. I mean, she grants the point, as difficult as my sister or I might have been, she's just like, it's just so much harder. And I appreciate that. I don't have a great answer. I just try and focus on it, and it's, creating communities. The one thing I will say is, there's now the research of having, a child be a part of some type of religious community. The one thing that the negative effects of social media in terms of self-image and places that, where young people have more mental health issues, the only place that it does not occur, it occurs across all socioeconomics. But the one place when you break data down are kids who are part of a religious community. And it doesn't matter if they're Muslim, if they're Jewish, if they're Christian, if they're anything. But it's about that community. It's about that, what they see and what they learn. And so I don't have an answer because it is really, really challenging to try and give your kids, help them see these things when they're seeing a lot of other things in other ways. You heard my childhood. This is all I saw. And then, like, I know my kids see a lot of things that are different.
You are the face of our successful public health fight against Ebola and Zika. How do you account for the poor performance on COVID-19?
So, a question like that, I would want to break down where there was a poor performance and how that gets defined, and where there's not. The idea that there was a vaccine that saved so many lives so quickly. From a public health person, I thought we had another year of this before we were going to get there. And my uncle had already died alone in a hospital of COVID. So the question in how we handle different parts of it, I'm with you. There are parts of it that I don't think we handled as well, and that we need to question ourselves and ask the hard questions. Should we have had everybody go to school? Like, can we actually talk about that issue instead of all of us kind of going to our corners and having an opinion? Can we talk about, all of those things? And so I don't think that's a simple question. It's a question that has a point of view, which I understand, appreciate, and think that there are elements that you could have done better. But there are also elements that were very well done. Separately, I would say, one of the things about pandemics that if you ask me, can you say one thing you'd do differently? And it came out of the Ebola work. After Ebola, we did a full study. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? I wanted to know what we had done well and what we hadn't. And one of the most important lessons was about communication. That oddly, as important as the science in a pandemic, because what's happening is in a pandemic, it's not just about the behavior of scientists and doctors, it's about the behaviors of all of us in a pandemic of something that is passed in that way, that the importance of communication, the importance of the clarity of here's what we know, here's what we don't know. And I'm going to tell you information is going to change because we're going to try and learn as quickly as we can. But at this moment, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. and expect that this is going to continue to evolve and change. And then the second thing is testing. For something that is asymptomatically passed, in other words, you may be passing it and you don't know you have it, the testing becomes like getting that testing out fast and well done. Like if you're going to err on a problem, and this is like where the analytics comes in. If you're going to err on getting the tests out, even if they're slightly imperfect. Make sure people know they're imperfect. Make sure they're imperfect on the upside, not the downside. That somebody tests positive versus, do those kinds of things because it was so, so important. Those are some things from a public health perspective, but it is a much larger conversation.
Thank you. The last question, AU is the home of our local NPR station, WAMU.
Yay, WAMU. We love WAMU.
I think you just answered the question. Do you find that on balance, WAMU is an asset or a liability for the university?
I clearly consider it an asset to the institution. It's hard, and public radio has gone through a very difficult time, and additional economic pressure on a university is tough. And I'm no longer the leader, so have not been engaged, obviously, for a year and a half. I think the one thing that AU does not do enough of is we don't do enough to connect ourselves to it. Like, if you own it, own it. You know what I mean? It's like, it is us. That is us. We are proud and should be a part of that. But I don't think, everybody in this audience, I think, knows the connection, but many, many people in DC do not know the connection, and around the country. In terms of A1, which is something that, we use with other public radio stations across the country. But I'm proud that that is a part of American University and who we are.
Sylvia, thank you. Yes, please.
For coming, and thank you for those wonderful questions. Before we close, I would like to thank everyone who helped with today's lecture, especially our AV team, our ushers and greeters, our Kiplinger Lecture lay leaders, our communications team, our facilities team, Abi, and of course, Sylvia Mathews Burwell. And as an alumni of American University, yes, I did have to get that in there. I appreciate the connection and all the work that you did for our university, so thank you very much. And I'd like to leave you with these words from Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1986, and these words seem especially poignant these days. There is much to be done. And there is much that can be done. One person of integrity can make a difference of life and death. As long as one dissident is in prison, our freedom will not be true. As long as one child is hungry, our lives will be filled with anguish and shame. What all these victims need above all is to know that they are not alone, that we are not forgetting them, that when their voices are stifled, we shall lend them ours, that while their freedom depends on ours, the quality of our freedom depends on theirs. May we leave this space today cherishing collective freedom and our responsibility to our community, and may we all be held in a love beyond all understanding. May it be so, amen, and blessed be. And I invite you all to join us for our reception in the fellowship hall right now.